Now, I know that this is exactly like the other one in almost every way, but you want this anyway.
Take it, Gandalf. Take it.
No further.
It has one extra module.
You cannot offer me this ring.
Take it. Take it. You must take it.
Don't tempt me, Frodo. I dare not take it.
Hi everyone, welcome to another Broken Meeple episode. Getting up there with my January backlog, almost caught up. Today I'm taking a look at Kingsburg, the second edition reprint. Most of you already know about the original Kingsburg. It was a smash hit Euro when it came out a few years ago. I enjoyed it, I had it in my collection, but I eventually got rid of it because it was growing a little bit stale for me, and I still prefer my Alien Frontiers on the shelf, which I believe does a similar thing but does it slightly better, perhaps mainly just because of the theme. But, you know, tomato, tomato. Some people prefer the Kingsburg, the Alien Frontiers, some people prefer one to the other, and there's several other dice rolling sort of Euro-based games, like dice placement games, that get everybody's, interest once in a while, so there's certainly plenty enough to choose from. But with Kingsburg now coming out as a second edition reprint, as the first edition has been out of print for quite some time, it has to be said, people are wondering, of course, is this worth getting? Has anything changed? Is it just the same old, same old? Are there any improvements? Has it actually been made worse? And there's always this kind of chat when a new reprint comes out. I mean, the Colosseum reprint, it's out of shop, sorry, but, Colosseum, when that came out, that was a massive, controversy about, that looks nothing like the original, I can't possibly like it, even if it's the same game, Days of Wonder was so much better. And to be fair, I like the Days of Wonder version, but I've got the TMG edition and I still like it. So with Kingsburg, it hasn't generated quite as much controversy as that one, although there have been one or two takes on the artwork, but we'll get onto that a bit later. So for those of you not in the know, Kingsburg is a fairly simple, light, worker placement dice game, where you are influencing advisors in order to get resources to build buildings in your province. You will also be recruiting soldiers in order to fight back a threat that will take place at the end of every round. And you will rinse and repeat this for 5 years or 5 rounds, during which you will have 3 phases where you will roll dice and influence the advisors. At the end of the year, there is a fight which you individually must go up against, and this is simultaneous with all the other opponents, and the threat will either, penalise you in some way, or you will get a reward, depending on whether your warrior, your recruitment strength is high enough to beat it. It's a fairly simple affair. You basically roll 3 dice and you use whatever combination of dice you've got to influence the advisors. If you want to influence, say, the one with the number 4 next to it, you need to place a 4 die on it. But you could also place a 3 and a 1 to make 4 and place it on that advisor. So of course, if you want to influence somebody above the value of 6, you're going to have to use multiple dice to do so, and if you want to use the powerful ones that are in more like the double-digit figures, you may need to use all 3 dice. Certainly if you want to get anywhere near, say, a 16, 17 or 18, you are going to need all 3 dice. It's just that simple. Now, of course, which advisors you want to influence is going to be partially based on your needs, partially based on how greedy you are with getting resources, and also what your opponents are doing, because like every other worker placement game, or at least the majority, there's a blockage situation where if somebody uses an advisor, you can't go to that advisor. It's a very simple game. You've got all sorts of different buildings you can build, so you can choose your own path to victory in combinations. They do different things, and you're just vying for straight up victory points at the end of the day. Kingsburg originally came out with an expansion called To Forge a Realm, which was regarded as one of the most essential expansions for a game ever. There is literally nobody I know out there who would say that there's no point getting Kingsburg To Forge a Realm. It just made Kingsburg that much better. But it was a separate expansion, even though pretty much everybody bought it. So with the second edition reprint, what's kind of changed and what's different? Well, to be honest, not a lot. This is a very straight up reprint. Of course, the artwork and the graphic design has changed, and this has caused some divisiveness of opinion with various people. Personally, I quite like it. I like the artwork that's been used on the characters. I think they're a bit more fleshed out. I think the graphic design is still easy to read, easy to interpret. You know, there's no ambiguous symbology, except for one slight thing. We'll get onto that a bit later. But in terms of the actual colours used, granted, they are a bit muted and there's a lot of brown everywhere. The score track is brown, the background is kind of brown, there's a fair amount of brown everywhere. And so it looks a bit more dark and gloomy-ish than, say, the original one, which was a bit more bright and colourful. But that's not to say I think this one is bad. I think it's still decent. It's just going to be very much a subjective opinion as to whether you prefer one or the other. Personally, I'm fine with this. I haven't got a problem with this artwork. You know, there were some aspects of the original I wasn't a fan of. There's some aspects of this one I'm not a fan of. So it's, you know, tomato, tomato, as I say. It still goes up to 5 players, although expect to be playing this game for a little bit of a length of time if you do go up to 5 players. Still takes usually around, say, 90 or so minutes in order to play. Again, if you play with more players, you could be heading up to further than that, and at that point I think it outstays its welcome. The advisors themselves have not changed one bit. Every single advisor does the exact same thing they did on the old board. And I know that's gonna, you know, kind of irk some people a little bit, because there was always a debate about the Queen character on the original board being a bit too powerful. You know, she wasn't like game breaking, but you rarely wanted to get high enough to influence the King on number 18 because the Queen on 17 was deemed to be much more useful. The King got you 3 resources and a combat strength, which is the equivalent of having 5 resources. But the Queen allowed you to get 2 resources of your choice, they weren't fixed, got you 3 victory points, which is quite a big deal, and allowed you to look at the threat deck, as I call it, to see what was coming at the end of the year. That's a very useful ability, and with that combination on the Queen, I would always pick her over the King any day, and most people did as well. Sadly, it doesn't look like they've addressed that issue. Whether they consider it an issue is another thing, whether you consider it as an issue is another thing, but yeah, they have not changed the Queen, or the King, or any other advisor. They do exactly the same thing as before, so you're going to have to bear that in mind. Components wise, you know, it's had a bit of an upgrade there too, in my opinion. The resources are no longer just boring cubes. You know, they're now actually, you know, little like wooden sort of stick logs, you know, round grey wooden blocks for stones and gold shaped wooden bars. Granted, it's not the biggest upgrade in the world. I would have liked there to be more realistic looking resources, but hey, at least it's now compatible with the stone mire treasure chest, so if I really want to beef this game up, I just bring one of those down. But the resources are an improvement. The biggest improvement I particularly like is the dice. The original dice were colourful, they were bright, but they were just boring wooden dice with pips on them, whoopie-doo. Here you've got these plastic dice which are easier to balance from a, you know, fairness perspective, you know, when rolling them. And they're more ornate, they're more intricately decorated, you can still read the number clearly, they're coloured. I much prefer these dice. However, I have heard 1 or 2 people, including Tom Vassell actually, who is not a fan of those dice. I can see why. You may have trouble reading them, or perhaps you prefer the simplistic nature of the original dice. Tomato, tomato. Saying that a lot at the moment, but that's kind of the deal with this game in a nutshell, really. Do you prefer one to the other in terms of art, components, that missing module? It's really going to be down to your own personal tastes. The combat tokens are very nice, fairly big, fairly round. You know, they're definitely an improvement in terms of the design on them, always a good thing. The boards, are a little flimsy. You know, they're equally bendy and flappy, but you know, they're not going to tear easily enough. And you should be able to put the tokens on them easily enough to signify what buildings you've got. Although those tokens are very, very small, so you might find them a little bit fiddly while you're working with them. With regards to the modules, everything from To Forge a Realm is in here. So you have the revised board on the flip side, which has 7 rows of buildings rather than 5. That is mandatory, you should throw that in every game, no questions asked. Why would you want less options? You want more options. You also have the 2 strips. that you can cover up certain rows of your board. Again, I throw those into every game. If the person doesn't want to use them and just wants to use the basic rows, they can do so. But at least if I'm playing, I can go, yeah, you know what, I want to be different. I'm going to cover up these 2 rows and see what I get. I may not even use the new buildings on those rows, but at least I have the option to. And that I always like. I can take it or leave it with the Destiny deck and the character abilities. They're okay, but most of the time I don't want to throw them in. I find that they're maybe a bit too, I don't know, just extra rules, extra fiddliness, but I'll play with them now and again. You know, the character abilities, people like player powers, and the event deck is very easy to use. You just basically flip a card at the start of each year, do what it says at the end, job done, mini adventure. The combat like tokens that you get, I usually throw them into every game, but I can understand if some people want to keep it simpler for new players. However, that roll of a die to get combat reinforces I always found to be a little bit swingy. So I much prefer to use these tokens because now you have to simultaneously reveal what level of strength you're going to add on to your combat strength for the threat. And whichever token you don't use by the end of the game ends up being victory points. It's a nice little addition, and again, I throw this into every game. So I'm always using at least the 2 strips, the revised board, and the combat tokens. So what's this new module and this print and play thing? Well, the print and play aspect was 4 scenarios that they came up with in order to vary how the game played. I never used these in the past, so this is a new feature for me, and probably is for a lot of other Kingsburg players out there. Basically, it's just 4 sheets that jig up the rules a little bit. Give like an interesting quirk in how the game plays. These are interesting. I'll throw one in now and again if I know that people have played Kingsburg and want a bit of variety, but they're not essential, it's just more options. More options is always a good thing. But here's my favourite aspect, and this is going to cause some people a bit of mental distress. There is a module in this, I forget what they call it, but basically you now have tiles for each of the 18 advisors that basically put on top of the advisor and change what they do. So, you know, the general who gave you 2 combat strength and look at the threat or something originally might now just give you 3 resources. And these abilities are much more different than they used to be. The others were pretty clear cut, you know, gives you this, gives you this, gives you this. These new ones are a bit more interesting. Some of them involve you taking something but giving something else to your opponent. Some of them allow you to use advisors that have not been used by other people. Some, you know, allow for are based on player count. Some have resources that keep chopping and changing, so that every year you have to replace it with something different. I like these new abilities, and there's 2 ways to play them. One of which you should use all the time, one of which you should use never. Basically, you've got 2 choices. You can either play the good way, as I call it, which is to do what the rules say, where at the start of every season where you're rolling the dice, you take 1 tile and replace 1 advisor, so that the advisors slowly change as the game progresses. Now, this is the preferred way I like to play it, because now 15 advisors have got new abilities by the end of the game, providing you remember to do so at the start of each season. The amount of times I have forgotten to do so is unreal. But these chop and change the game nicely, and it means that the advisors do different things at different times, keeping each game varied and allowing for really good replayability. The way I don't like it though, is when you use the alternative variant, which is you have all of them on the board to start with and you slowly take them off. Because for most people, even people who have played Kingsburg, you're now got to teach 18 new abilities, and the iconography is different on these than it is on the old ones, so you do have to teach something. They're sort of intuitive, but you are going to have to check a few rules here and there for some tiles that really could have added just some extra graphic design to illustrate their point. So that just elongates the game, makes it fiddly to teach, and I don't like playing that way at all. I would much rather play the original, like the first way they suggest, which is 1 at a time you place them on. This module is amazing though. This is on par with the whole revised board and 2 strips that you can cover up your board. It's that good because it just infinitely increases the replay value, because now all the advisors chopping and changing at different times will affect the game. The first one I tried of this with that module, we covered up the general in the first season. So suddenly combat strength was actually quite hard to come by, and therefore the threats became more of an issue, so people were really gung-ho trying to get combat strength by other means such as the buildings. Now, if we'd covered up somebody who gave, if we'd covered up all the people who gave gold, for example, and gold becomes a scarce resource, because these revised abilities tend to be very different from what the original counterpart does. So suddenly gold becomes scarce, now those buildings are harder to build, and gold is much more valuable. So it really has a good positive impact on the game. And here lies the problem. Because the print and play scenarios, you can take it or leave. If you want them for your original Kingsburg, you can go get them. But this game literally is only different for most people because of one module. And now they're asking the question, should I buy this when I've got the original edition? That's a tough call. Because, first of all, I'll say, if you don't own Kingsburg, or you only own Kingsburg without the expansion, then you owe it to yourself to get this. This is a solid Euro game and worth getting. And without the To Forge Realm expansion, Kingsburg is a much lesser game. It certainly would not be worthy of a lot of the top charts without that expansion built in. It was that essential. Why do you think they've put it in this reprint? It's because a lot of people think the same way. But if you own the first edition with the expansion, your decision is a lot tougher. And I feel your pain. Because I don't know if I can recommend that you buy this one just for that module. That module is solid. Whether they'll print a first edition version, I very much doubt it. I think you're unlikely to see this. And so you're in that horrible position where you've got the first edition with To Forge a Realm, and you really want this module, and you can't have it unless you pay the odds and the ends for this entire game. And it's not like you can just get the expansion module on its own, because the graphic design and the artwork is going to look completely different from your original edition. So I do feel your pain. That is a hard step to be in. If you're made of money and you are thinking of getting rid of your old Kingsburg anyway or something and getting a revamped version, then by all means, sell it on and grab this version because it's decent and that module is amazing. But I am not going to say that if money isn't an issue for you, that you should sell your original Kingsburg and get this one. It's not worth that outlay, all that money, just for one module. Not worth it. However, a lot of you probably don't even own Kingsburg because it's been out of print for so long. So hopefully you're in that cool position where you don't own the game or you only own the base set and you need all the expansions. Because the expansions are a must buy. They're so essential, I can't even describe how essential they are. They're just so needed. So yeah, that's kind of the gist with it. So all in all, Kingsburg, still a great light Euro game. I probably would have it down in the bottom end of my top 100. It's not something that I'm going to go, oh my god, this game is amazing. But I do respect it and I think it's a solid Euro game in its own right. And I'm going to hang on to this copy anyway because I feel like, as much as I like Alien Frontiers, it's hard to teach that one to new players. I need a dice worker placement game that I consider to be light and easy to teach people. This one is now going to stay in my collection because, predominantly, of that new module. I know it's a hard decision for you guys to make, but that module seriously is very, very good. But still, like I say, if you've got the original with that expansion, unless you're made of money, really think hard about whether you believe it's worth it for one module, because at the end of the day, your money, not mine. So that's it for me. Personally, Kingsburg used to fetch about a 7 out of 10 for me on a personal note. I'd say with this new module, it's about the same, actually. I know you'd expect it. Well, why is it not higher in your rating? Well, the module is great, but, Kingsburg can sometimes go a bit long with too many players. It can lead to a little bit of AP. There's no real theme here. It is still a dry Euro game. The theme is pretty much non-existent. So there are those aspects that obviously don't normally sit well with me from games I personally like. That's why I prefer Alien Frontiers. But yeah, still a solid game that I can recommend to a lot of players, particularly in this new guise. Just bear in mind the points I made about comparing it from first to second edition. So that's it for me for another review. I'll see you a bit later for another one. And for now, regardless of whether you're out of pocket after watching this review, it's just only a game. So think hard. Think very, very hard. See you next time, guys. Take care.